It's great to be here.
Hello,
Hello, everyone.
ASU+GSV. It's great to be here.
Hello, 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 hello. Yeah, backstage we were debating: do we go boy, boy, girl, girl, boy, boy? Andrew goes Asian, Asian, Asian. So it's great to be here. Thank you for hiring us and giving us this opportunity. It's a really special moment for us to have Andrew here. Andrew, thank you for being here. ASU+GSV, our mantra is that all people deserve equal access to the future, and we believe that the key lever to get there is innovation and education. You've had, many people may not know this, but you've actually had a career in education on top of Venture for America and running for office. What excites you most about education innovation?
Well, let's give it up for some of the entrepreneurs who are just up here pitching. I mean, those are the folks that excite me. And I love this gathering. I love ASU and the fact that it's innovating in so many ways, because we know that the way education is going to be delivered in the future has to change if we're going to keep up with the demands of the modern economy. And the tough part is that the incentives aren't always in lockstep. You know what I mean? Like an institution can not adapt and do just fine for a certain period of time. And then when an innovator comes in, the customer base might not always be ready. So what excites me is that people are pushing the envelope, and I do see a lot more readiness to experiment with different models on both sides, both on the provider side and on the consumer side. What's interesting is I think the consumer side might be the trickier one, where there are a lot of people that still, and this is funny because I'm a dad among other things, and people ask me sometimes about saving up for college. I'm like, is there really going to be college by the time my kids, like get there? Like, do I need to save for this thing? And then time keeps passing, and I'm like, oh shoot, like man, now my kid's 9, and it seems like college is still a thing, so I better get a move on. So there are a lot of parents who I think are making the same kind of calculation, and then the students and teenagers will still take cues from their parents.
Awesome. And so tying a little bit more on that education note, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you ran for president on this campaign on AI, on transformation of the economy. How are you thinking about those things today?
Oh yeah, so how many of you remember my presidential campaign? You remember that stuff?
Yep.
For some of you, it was when you turned on the TV screen, I showed up on one of the Democratic debate stages, and you're like, oh, that's different. Yeah. Woo! Well, but before that, I ran an organization called Venture for America. I was friends with many tech entrepreneurs, and when I would talk to them off stage or with a couple drinks in them, I'd say, hey, are we getting rid of a lot of these jobs? Like, is your company automating a lot of the most common opportunities? They'd be like, oh, yeah, that's totally our business model. I'd hear this over and over again. And then when Trump won in 2016, I saw this as a giant red flag. It was like, wow, things are going worse than even I'd imagined. And so I put 2 and 2 together where I said, look, we'd automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in the Midwest and the South. It was driving people to terrible leadership like Trump. Sorry if there are any Trump supporters here, but what are you going to do? Yeah, I didn't think it was going to be a problem here. It's fine. So I knew that AI was going to get more and more powerful. I knew that it was going to keep on pushing the most vulnerable Americans to the curb. And so I decided to run for president, trying to make that case. And AI is impacting education, the labor market, more and more quickly and powerfully now. Unfortunately, the COVID pandemic has increased a lot of organizations' appetite for investment in automation, because if you're customer-facing, customers are much more likely to see an automated attendant, or even like, let's say, like a self-driving pizza delivery car as appropriate as opposed to dystopian. So unfortunately, the stuff I ran for president, if only I were president today, I could have fixed it all. But the issues I ran on are speeding up, and they're going to affect the people here. I'm not, frankly, as concerned about, because in this economy of the future, it's going to reward knowledge and skills and education all the more. I'm more concerned about the 65% of Americans who will not graduate from college or the equivalent. And so those were the people I was running for in many ways.
So today, you're working on something new. Tell us a little bit more about the Forward Party. What is it, its origins, and coming out and breaking out of that duopoly that you tell many people about?
Oh yeah, it's good fun. So I was not someone who ever thought I'd end up running for office. My parents did not raise me saying, like, you're going to be president someday. It was more like, you're terrible. Clean your room. So I ran for president on this case of automation and the fourth industrial revolution. And in some ways, we achieved unlikely heights. I qualified for 7 presidential debates. I outcompeted half a dozen senators, governors, and the rest of it. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Yang Gang. I love you, too. But after I came off the trail, I still had this sinking feeling. I was like, why do I still feel like we're not necessarily going to rise to the challenges of today or tomorrow? Why do I still feel like we're stuck? So I started to dig into the political system, the mechanics, and I'd had some firsthand experience with the way the media operates, where you do have these kind of polarized narratives. For those of you who are into politics and the media, I'm going to give you some numbers that help explain it to me. So it turns out that your relationship with the media diverges sharply based upon your politics, where 69% of Democrats have a high trust in media to report news objectively. If you go to Republicans, it goes down to 15%. So when you wonder why Republicans don't seem to listen to the thing, you think they listen to their own media. They don't even listen to their own media. You know what I mean? It's essentially kind of institutional trust versus mistrust. And so when I started digging into our political system, I realized that we had this polarized media incentive, social media pouring gasoline on the whole thing, and the two-party system was going to make us more and more inflamed, angry, depressed. 42% of both Democrats and Republicans view the other side as evil or corrupt or morally depraved. So in that context, I said, you know what, this is going to lead us to bad things more than good things. You're not paying a price if problems aren't solved. A U.S. senator said this to me. I feel like I get all this gossip from senators, and then I don't name names, but a U.S. senator said to me, a problem is worth more to us unaddressed than if we step forward and try and solve it. And think about what that means. And what she meant was, look, if the problem's there, I can raise money around it, I can get votes and energy, whereas if we try and solve it, then the people in my base get angry. So that's why the problems get worse, not better. So when I unpacked all this and realized that this is where the country was, I said, you know what, we have to try and get away from this two-party system to try and have a different dynamic. And if you look around the world, I'm all about taking good ideas from other places or people. I'm not, it's not like universal basic income was my idea. I mean, it's like MLK, a lot of people came before me. So on this one, if you go to the UK, how many political parties do they have? 5. Germany, 7. Sweden, 8. So if you have one party succumb to terrible leadership, it's no longer an existential threat or a move to authoritarianism. You know what I mean? Not that that's relevant to America today. So it's about trying to make our system more genuinely resilient and modern, because a two-party system is not designed to succeed over time. Oh. Excellent. Wow, I wasn't sure if that would, get applause, but I'm glad it does.
And so on top of that, on top of the Forward Party, you also wear multiple other hats. I wanted to dig a little bit more into your recently announced, foray into Web3, a little bit into Lobby 3, which you announced. Can you first kind of tell us a little bit more about what first piqued your interest in crypto and kind of where you see crypto regulation and activism playing all into that?
So I want you all to rewind to the first time you heard about my campaign. So what did you hear? You heard, if you're Asian, you heard Asian guy running for president. And then the first thought you had was, please let him not be terrible. But if you if you weren't Asian, what you heard is that someone wanted to give everyone $1,000 a month. Remember that? And you thought, well, that seems too good to be true or far out. It turns out that, again, there's an idea that's been around for a long time. But one of the communities that embraced that message earliest was the cryptocurrency community. And so then when I talked to them, I said, like, why are you so into this universal basic income idea? And it turns out that they operate in this sense of building the future and optimism and abundance to a higher degree than other groups. And so obviously, if someone supports you, you start meeting people. And you fast forward to today, my goal is still to eradicate poverty. I think poverty is stupid and unnecessary. I think we should get rid of it. So there are two main ways to get rid of poverty. Number one is you get the US government to start giving everyone money, which I'm still working on. I started a lobbying organization modeled after an Onion article in 2011. So the Onion article said the American people hire their own lobbyists to fight for their interests on Capitol Hill, and there's a guy being like, now they'll take us seriously. I thought it was the funniest article ever, and I was like, we should totally do that. So then 10 years later, I hired 15 lobbyists, and they're on Capitol Hill advocating for anti-poverty measures. So that's path number one. But then path number two, you've seen this incredible proliferation of value in Web3, where you have technologies and tools and currencies that didn't exist 10, 12 years ago, in some cases transforming thousands, tens of thousands of people's lives. And so I thought to myself, why don't we try and use this to alleviate poverty? So what I'm doing is I'm going to folks in Web3 saying, hey guys, if you believe that this set of tools really can elevate the standard of living for everyone, let's prove it. And then if we can prove it, then we can take that case to the public and to the folks in DC and say, this is actually going to be something that helps solve the problems that you and yours care about, and you should work with this group of people as opposed to just trying to push them offshore.
So we just had 10 seed stage startups pitch, and I feel very blessed because in 2012, I got to see Andrew Yang in his seed stage startup phase pitching Venture for America in this small, tight room on a college campus. And it was so meaningful to see that to then, the Series A with the announcement in the New York Times, to the Series B and Series C, and then the UBI, and just all the maniacal craze that we had for you in your community. It means a lot, really, for us to have seen that as an Asian American. But I can imagine there's also a lot of pressure on you. So what was that like for you to deal with the pressure of representing Asian Americans?
Oh, thanks for saying that, Kevin. I will confess to you all that one of the reasons I ran for president was because I thought getting on that presidential debate stage would be a powerful example for Asian Americans around the country, just to turn on the TV and be like Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Andrew Yang, and be like, what? I thought that would be really fun and positive. And I say this as someone who grew up Asian in this country, probably gathered those two things. And you turn on the TV and you would not see people that looked like you on those kinds of stages. I remember when I was 4 or 5 years old, growing up in upstate New York, anytime there was an Asian person on TV, I would run and grab my parents and be like, look, look, look. And it was always Connie Chung. And then eventually my parents got tired of getting dragged to the TV every time Connie Chung was on the newscast. So I understood that it would mean something. And when I was traveling the country, it was extraordinarily heartwarming when Asian parents would bring their kids to meet me and say, look, look. This means you can run for president, like that. And that would happen to me at stops throughout the country. So it's something that I cherished and treasure.
Right, thank you. Yeah. I think the one thing that also happened in that was when we saw you in the media and we saw the data on how you had the least speaking time, or we saw other politicians laugh at you. I mean, literally saying your name and giggling. It reminded us Asian Americans of some of the things we do deal with. What was that like for you, and how did you kind of process those things?
This is the joke that we had was like, it's all fun and games until Andrew Yang passes you in the polls. Because I was like the grim reaper of marginal presidential candidates. Like if Andrew Yang came and touched you on the shoulder, you were gone. So that was one of the experiences we had. I mean, it was true. Because if you remember this field, I know you're getting some flashbacks. But if you remember this field, there were 24 presidential candidates initially. You know what I mean? Like, and then they had these stages. They got whittled down and whittled down. So to your earlier question about feeling some kind of responsibility, Asian Americans are the most underrepresented community in the country in terms of elected office. You know, like there are other fields in which Asian Americans are prospering and overperforming, but if you look at politics, it's not happening. And so that's something that I would love to help change. And I'm forthright with people that when I grew up, my parents not only didn't say like, hey, you're going to be president someday, but they didn't talk about American politics. And there was not a message that I got that American politics was something that my brother or I should be investing time in, certainly not our career in. So that's something I would like to change. Because the fact is, if Asian Americans don't participate in our political process to the right level, then nothing is going to change for our sense of our place of belonging or, frankly, our political voice in this country.
I was roaming around the halls today, proudly saying I was had a chance to interview you, and one very prominent ed tech entrepreneur says, "I really hate what Andrew says, but I really like the guy." And it just made me realize, I think one thing you have done very well is being a bridge and being someone who is authentic. How do you think about that role, if that even is something important to you, of being a bridge? And
wait, let me unpack that a little bit. Why does he hate what I'm saying? It's like
Martin Basiri, are you here? But yeah, here? Hello? Okay, never mind. I guess he's not here. Okay, guess he doesn't like you enough. but yeah. So, but that's something I have heard. You just being able to be a bridge. And people like your authenticity. How have you kind of kept that amidst all the different things pulling you different directions?
I was in Iowa, New Hampshire, and Ohio, and all these places for weeks and months. In order to make that debate stage, it was like dozens of trips away from my family to places that that I hadn't been and might not necessarily have seemed like a natural place for someone like me to be campaigning. And so people would hang out with you, Kevin, and frankly, they'd take your temperature and be like, "Hey, why is this person here?" Is the most simple question. And then the possible answers are, he's a narcissist, he's loony, he just really wants attention or whatever. But then eventually, after they started eliminating various things, they'd land on he actually cares and wants to help. And then if you land on he cares and wants to help, then you're like, oh, let me hear him out. Let me see what he's talking about, and maybe even sometimes support him. So that was the experience I had. There's a lot of mistrust in American life, but if you put yourself out there far enough, there is a reciprocity principle that gets evoked in humans, where they're like, oh, this person's here at my doorstep. Maybe I should hear him out. I also think people concluded at some point that I must not be in the pocket of any corrupt interest, because they would never send the anonymous Asian guy who wants to give everyone money to be like, hey, I'm gonna this is the plan. So people sensed that I was from outside of the machine, and a lot of their mistrust right now is reserved for the machine. I just seemed like a genuine actor, which I like to believe I am.
So one final question for you. You've totally broken down so many barriers for Asian Americans in this country, and even anecdotally, internationally, my family, all the way in Hong Kong, only campaign they've ever donated to, Yang.
That's legal, right? They're like
yeah.
like U.S. citizens
right now,
or
right?
green card
They
holders,
probably are
right?
watching.
Hello. Hi.
But it was the first time they saw someone, who looked like us on screen running for a presidential race. But if anything, the past 2 years, pandemic has just shown us, there's still so much work to be done for the Asian American community. What advice would you give to the next generation of Asian American trailblazers?
I think that there is a cultural shift happening in the Asian American community. I like to believe that I can play a role in it. But that the guidance and advice we might have received is not going to be the path forward for our community. And the guidance, and again, I'll just speak for myself, the advice I got was keep your head down, get good grades, try and get a good job, try and find a place for yourself in this country. And it wasn't make waves, speak up, run for office. Like those things were not prioritized or emphasized. But you can see this next generation, like they're gravitating more towards activism, towards making their feelings and voice heard. And I think that's going to be a permanent shift. You know, like that there's an unfortunate level of antipathy and hostility that many folks who are in our community have experienced. And you know, you and I were talking, where I live in New York City, and like I've personally met dozens of victims of hate crimes and violence, some of whom will never be the same. And so when you have that experience over and over again, it activates your community in whole new ways. I wish it didn't have to be this way, but I feel like this is something that we're going to be fighting for a long time to come.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Oh, this is so quick. Thank you all.